Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome you once again on Salam Media. This is Wednesday night with myself, Inayet Wadee, and wonderful being back with you after somewhat of a break. Well, it wasn't a break. Salam Media, the Matt Gilbert tour, right across the entire country, and I must say it was quite a hectic schedule, but at the end of the day, in terms of outreach, in terms of outcomes, a lot was achieved. In fact, a lot of value was actually added with the Dr. Matt Gilbert tour to South Africa. And right across the entire country, we've seen the reaction from the mainstream media. There was just huge interest in what the Dr. Matt Gilbert tour was all about. But nevertheless, we continue, and today it was International Solidarity Day with the people of Palestine. I had the opportunity of attending the event with the Palestine ambassador, various ambassadors, diplomatic corps right across the entire country, from the Arab world, civil society, NGOs, and many other organizations. The media obviously was present as well. And again, we get to a stage where we know it's a very, very painful situation. It's been painful watching what has been unfolding since October the 7th in Gaza, and also to a large extent in the West Bank as well. And with the truce at this point in time, we're not too sure how long this is going to last, but we know it's been extended for 2 days. And we need to unpack where we are after all the mayhem, after all the carnage that had taken place. And at this point in time, things are still very, very critical. And this is the reason why we are going to be joined this morning by two academics. We've got Professor Nidal Sakr, March for Justice out of the United States of America, and also going across to Israel. We joined by Professor Jeff Halper. I see Professor Nidal is on screen already, and in Jerusalem, we see Professor Jeff Halper. Professor Nidal, assalamu alaikum and welcome.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's always a pleasure to be with you, brother, and salam to Professor Jeff Halper. It's nice to see you again.
Yes, and salam to you as well, Prof Jeff. In fact, always wonderful having you with us.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Right, Professor Nidal, let's just look at where we are at this point in time. And after all the carnage, after all the mayhem, and with large parts of Gaza, or I would say northern Gaza, reduced to rubble, we know the death statistics, the people that have been injured, those that have been displaced. And throughout all of this now, we've got this truce, this temporary truce. And let's just try and make a sense of, where we are at this point in time, Prof. Nidal.
Where we are today is where we were 100 years ago, and it's been ongoing until today. We have a land that's holy to very much all monotheistic faiths around the world. I think probably it's hard to say which one reveres that land more than other, but let's say that we all agree that this land is sacred and should be treated and dealt with as such, along with the people of that land. And we have like an expansionist colonial Zionist project that has really disrupted the world peace ever since, and started with Britain colonizing and occupying that holy land. And then the colonial project evolved into the new phase of quote unquote the Zionist. And the Zionist project is serving like so many people, but the only people that it's not serving by any means are the people of faith from all of those three monotheistic faiths. We see today that the entire world is standing in solidarity, Jews, Christians, and Muslims. And we see some of the loudest voices actually around the world today, and the most active and the most engaged are actually voices of Jews defending their own faith, first and foremost. And on the other hand, we have a project that's against human life, against a religion, against any sanctity of anything, right? And Gaza is basically paying the price for the entire humanity and for people of faith from all over the world, regardless to what faith that is. We have Jews fighting for Palestine, fighting for Gaza, just like Gaza and Palestine is fighting for Jews and for Judaism and all the monotheistic faiths.
Yes, shukran for that, Prof Nidal. And I just like, Professor Jeff Halper as well. Now, Prof, I know we spoke to you early on. In fact, Salam Media spoke to you on very, very early on. It was, I think, within the first 2 or 3 days of what had actually happened. And since then, we haven't had much of an opportunity. But I know you have been monitoring the situation. You've been analyzing the situation as well. And just looking at it from your side, in just your overall view on what has transpired and where we are at this point in time.
Well, I think we always have to foreground the political in all of these things. And have I frozen? I'm still with you? Okay.
Yes, you.
All right. We have to foreground the political, of course. The way Israel is trying to present this, everything began on October 7th with the Hamas attack. And therefore, there's no context. There's no colonialism. There's no displacement. There's no occupation. There's no violations of Palestinian rights at all. It's all simply begins with the attack, and Israel is now justifiably retaliating or reacting, which is especially the way the United States is trying to present this as well. If you take that small framing that begins on October 7th, then what Israel is doing seems justified to people that don't know any of the background. And again, Israel has the support of the American government, so they're a party in supporting the Israeli Hasbara, the Israeli political line. But what we know, and what Professor Nidal just said appropriately, is that it didn't begin on October 7th. We're talking about 130 years of Zionist colonization of Palestine. We're talking about 76 years of displacement. The displacement of most of the Palestinians in 1948 in the Nakba. We're talking about 56 years of occupation. And if we put it in the bigger picture, Israel feels that it's winning. It's very close to completing its settler colonial project. And that means two things. It means taking over Palestine from the river to the sea. And we have today Israeli rule over the entire area from the Mediterranean to the Jordan River, with the Palestinians confined to small enclaves on about 15% of historic Palestine. So Israel now controls 85% of the land and rules. So that's one thing. And what the danger here, the drama is in Gaza, obviously, but the real political drama, the more important story, is in the West Bank, where ethnic cleansing is happening. Settlers and soldiers are driving Palestinians, again, it's Nakba 2, out of their villages, trying to cleanse this area C, which is 62% of the West Bank. And then what Biden, you have to put 2 and 2 and 2 together. What Biden has already announced, and he's repeated this many times, is as soon as the fighting dies down in Gaza, the United States and Europe are going to move to imposing a two-state solution. And of course, the two-state solution is dictated by Israel. In other words, it's apartheid. The two-state solution will be Israel on 78% of Palestine, plus East Jerusalem and the Old City, plus Area C, where the settlements are. So again, Israel will take over the Israeli state, and the two-state idea will be on 80 to 85% of historic Palestine, and the Palestinian state that will not be sovereign, will not be viable, will exist truncated on the other 15 to 20%. This is the big story. And I think that what's happening in Gaza is in some ways irrelevant. I mean, certainly not in human terms by any means, but in terms of the political program, because Israel knows it can't drive out. It would like to transfer out the population of Gaza, but that's not going to happen. And so I think Israel's given up on Gaza. It doesn't really care if it's taken over by the UN or by a coalition of Arab governments or whoever takes it. Israel wants it off its hands, because what Israel's interested in is expanding eastward into the West Bank, you see. And that's, I think, the danger that we're facing. As we're looking at Gaza, things are being cooked up between Israel, the United States, and Europe for this imposition of an apartheid regime when things begin to cool down. That's the first achievement that Israel will get if it happens. And the second will be, of course, returning to the normalization path. You know, Israel wins when it controls all of historic Palestine, and that's accepted as normal by the Arab world. And all the signs are, even though the Arab peoples obviously are very strongly for the Palestinians, the indications are the Arab governments are eager to get back to normalization with Israel for all kinds of reasons. And so I think we have to certainly focus on Gaza in terms of the human costs and the crimes that Israel's committing, but we can't lose sight of the bigger political picture, which is a coming formalization of the apartheid regime and potential normalization by the Arab world, all of which we have to really oppose very strongly.
Well, thank you for that, Prof. And let's get Professor Nidal back into the discussion. Now, Professor Nidal, you know, one can actually analyze, one can unpack in many ways. There's a political discourse, there's a geopolitical discourse, there's a legal discourse. One can look at it from a human rights perspective, an occupation perspective. There's just so much that is coming out. And I think looking at the world and how much wiser is the world, because this is unprecedented. We've seen a protest mushrooming right across the entire world. Many people are looking at it. We've seen the media come under very, very close scrutiny as well. We've seen so much fake news. We've seen lies being debunked. So much is even slogans getting to a point where even slogans have come under scrutiny, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. All of that has actually come out. So there are many, many areas, many angles that one can actually look at it. And, you know, each of them is important. Each of them is extremely relevant in the face of what we've seen, in the face of the brutality, in the face of the genocide that is unfolding. But just looking at it purely from the Palestinian perspective, because they are on the receiving end. They are the victims, while all of this is playing out right across the entire world.
Yes, Brother Inayet, and thank you, Professor Jeff, for these insights. What matters is really the reality, and everything else is quote unquote noise or on the margin of what's happening. And I've been around long enough to realize that once the guns speak, then everybody has no choice but to listen. The guns right now are Hamas guns, and well, very much from 1987 when they first started. But right now, the reality is the main story, the narrative, and the headline is actually what Hamas has, or what Hamas dictates, what Hamas shows the world. Everybody else very much is on the reaction to that, whether it's politicians, whether it's the US, whether it's Israel, whether it's even the grassroots that we see on the streets, so forth. There are so many things that happen this time that are different than any other time. This is a turning point in history. This is a humanity at crossroad. And from this, we can see, actually, as far as we can, if we really look at what's happening and what it means in terms of the realities on the ground today and the change of course of history that it means. Just like Professor Jeff mentioned, that this situation did not start on October 7th, and it's been going on for 130 years. And thank you for correcting me. I thought it's 100 something, but it's, yeah, it's since the beginning of the Zionist project in the 1800s. So basically what we have right now is things came to the point where it became impossible when you have 2.3 million people are literally like dying of starvation and of deprivation of their rights, and the West Bank basically being subjected to very much ethnic cleansing and genocide at the same time. And of course, our holy site, Al-Aqsa Mosque, being violated. So when it came to that point, there was no point of just continuing and waiting, because the whole world seems to be just either culprit by silence or being part of this colonial Zionist project. Hamas did what they had to do to bring the world's attention to focus on the main issue of humanity, which is Palestine and what it represents. And then we saw, of course, like everything from October 7 has been nothing but reaction. Reaction, of course, has been like, as we see, beyond reason. Like it showed that the true face of the US, the true face of colonialists, of Zionists, which is all like basically like the same sides of the same or different sides of the same story. The world has woken up to that reality. Nobody, like the majority of the people around the world, even though that they believed in the Palestinian cause and the humanity of the Palestinian cause and so forth, but they did not see many of the faces of Israel and its supporters and the US and so forth. And sure enough, the US reaction by supporting the Israeli genocide of Gaza has brought to our memory what the US has been doing around the world for so long. The US history has been basically doing the same thing that Israel is doing right now. They've done it to Vietnam, they've done it to Korea, they've done it to Iraq, to Afghanistan, to everywhere that they went. But people like this seem, because like they're so often apart, that we did not see the whole thing in context. Today we see Israel and what Israel is doing, and the US are just one and same. And the world conscious is really waking up to this, even to bring in the colonial genocide that happened to the countries in Africa. So all of a sudden, like they fell into that trap of showing their true faces. Of course, anybody who is a human, nor any normal human being with conscience and who basically values human life and the sanctity of the birthrights to freedom and to dignity, could not accept it. That's why people like from all over the world, they just like rising up on every level to trying to speak out, trying to do something to show that they reject and they're against what's happening. Luckily, because we have people like you, like Professor Jeff, that we have some sort of guidance on how to address these issues. So there has been a movement around the world where like, okay, now this is the situation, how we put it in the right context so we can make sure to change or at least to affect the situation and to give support to the people of Gaza and to the resistance. And then we have this global movement of like the legal front and the unions that are forming to remind us that actually there are like literally hundreds of legal judgments against the US, against Israel in different courts, international, domestic, local, and so forth. And there is really very intense movements right now in trying to hold them accountable in every court possible and every jurisdiction. And I think a time is going to come where all of these officials who've been involved in supporting this genocide of Gaza, they will basically have no place to go because they will have warrants of arrest anywhere they go. That reminds us of what Tzipi Livni had to deal with and Ehud Barak in the UK about 10, 15 years ago. So we are actually along that track where actually everybody who supported this genocide of Gaza, that they're going to start paying a heavy legal price. And, there is political movements are mobilizing based on the pressure, the legal pressure and the grassroots of people on the streets, where now actually we're finding that this is turning into people like, for example, like the Jewish Voice for Peace storming the Capitol and the Congress and basically chasing down almost every press conference by any US official right now demanding ceasefire and so forth. So we have like, we're seeing like people actually are moving not only just by voicing their protest to all of these crimes against humanity that are committed by Israel and its supporters on the street, but they're also like taking it to political action, legal action, grassroots movement. Unfortunately, the humanitarian side, because we have occupation on the other side of Gaza. Gaza is under two occupations, basically, by the Egyptians on one side, the Egyptian government of the dictator, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, and the Israelis, and both of them are having chokehold on Gaza, where like no food, no medicine, no fuel, no water gets in, trying to somehow thinking that those people are just going to die and disappear. Well, obviously they don't know anything about the Palestinian resilience spirit. And, Palestine is there to stay. And all of these, like what I call smoke screen and noises of aggression, oppression, colonialism, Zionism, and so forth, is just a matter of time before it's all gone.
Yes, Prof Nidal, and also Professor Jeff Halper, just looking at what is playing out within Israel. And when one looks at Benjamin Netanyahu and the people that he's surrounded by. Now, you spoke about the ethnic cleansing that is taking place in West Bank, and also looking at what's taking place in Jerusalem, where we've seen people like Itamar Ben-Gvir capitalize, and I actually forget the person in the West Bank, but both of them have actually capitalized on what has taken place on October the 7th, what is playing out in Gaza for their own ends and purposes. And it appears at this point in time that even Benjamin Netanyahu is unable to stop them, because these are loose cannons. They are like runaway trains at this point in time without brakes.
Well, I don't think he wants to stop them. I mean, there's very little daylight between him and Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. We have to be careful of one thing.
Smotrich, yes, that's the name.
Pardon me? Yeah, Smotrich is what you meant. Bezalel Smotrich, who is basically the warlord governor of the West Bank today, a violent settler who is running the civil administration, which is Israel's military government of the West Bank. We have to be careful about one thing, or accurate, and that is that this isn't simply a product of an extreme right-wing government of Netanyahu and Ben-Gvir and Smotrich and all the rest. The whole story of Zionism, and really 80% of the story of Zionism and its crimes, have to do with the Labor Party, with the so-called left, not with the Likud and the right. Don't forget, Zionism was a labor party, a socialist movement, a secular movement. It wasn't a right-wing, some chauvinistic, it was a left-wing movement. In 1948, during the Nakba, the prime minister was Ben-Gurion from the Labor Party. In 1967, when the when the Nakba happened, or and the occupation occurred, Levi Eshkol was the prime minister, a labor person. Labor began the settlements. Labor built the wall. Labor really ran the army all these years. So Zionism in Israel is really more of a product of the so-called left, more than the right. Now, the right wing, of course, takes it to a wider extreme. But the idea, for example, of leaving all these settlements intact, that's across the board consensus. From the Zionist left, which is Meretz, and the Labor Party, which have basically disappeared from the political scene, all the way to the Likud and the religious Zionists. The idea that a Palestinian state should be a truncated Bantustan, wall-to-wall consensus. The idea that the army has to remain in permanent control of any Palestinian state, even if one emerges, or that Israel has to keep control of its economy and its borders. All that is wall-to-wall consensus. So the Israeli public is furious at Netanyahu. Netanyahu's not going to last 10 minutes after the fighting breaks down in Gaza. I think Ben-Gvir and Smotrich are out. That whole gang is gone. But they're going to be replaced simply by more moderate-looking, maybe more calmly speaking, right-wing Likudnik people. The next prime minister is going to be Benny Gantz. Gantz is a general, one of the heads of, he'll be, I think, the next prime minister. Vicious guy. I mean, he appears very moderate, he's soft-spoken, and he looks very good in a suit and so on, but he's vicious. When he ran in the last elections, he opened his campaign with a video saying, "I killed 4,000 terrorists in Gaza." This is a couple of years ago. So let's not be under the illusion that once Netanyahu and Ben-Gvir and Smotrich and these guys are gone, we're going to get a more normal Israeli government. Zionism is a settler colonial movement. And that's not just a slogan. I mean, in a way, we throw that around all the time, but it means something. What it means is the purpose of Zionism all these years has been to transform an Arab country into a Jewish country, transform Palestine into Israel. And that's all across the board, from right to left. And so that agenda has not changed. And on the contrary, as I said before, Israel feels that we're getting very close to completing it and normalizing with the Arab world and so on. So I think we have to really be careful not to simply present this as a product of the Likud government, but we really have to see this as an extension of what Zionism is doing to the Palestinians, all these decades.
Yes. Now, Professor Nidal, just looking at it from a Palestinian perspective and looking at Hamas, and obviously initially we've seen the narrative on October the 7th about Hamas, about the attacks, about the beheading of babies. Obviously, a lot of that was actually proved to be false. But looking at these attacks on Gaza had evolved over a period of time, and what this has actually done for Hamas, how Hamas is actually seen by ordinary people right across the entire world, even to the point where recently, with the exchange of those that have been taken captive as well, we've seen a completely different picture emerging, actually, where we've seen the conduct of Hamas. Is Hamas now being accepted, especially by those who doubted Hamas in the beginning? Are they seen very, very differently now that we've seen, all of this evolve over a period of time?
Well, there's two types of answer to this question. The first question is the first answer is the short answer, which is basically many people are talking about Gaza after Hamas. And I think the right question to ask right now is Palestine after Israel. I think that's much more realistic. And let's put Hamas in perspective. Hamas is a movement that basically came up out of the reaction to the crime in 1987 of December 7, 1987 against Palestinian laborers going to work inside so-called Israel. And from that point on, it started with throwing rocks, and then it evolved to what it is. Those Hamas commanders and leaders and fighters and so forth that you see today actually are the very same 8 and 10-year-old children standing for the Merkavas at the time with rocks and stones to throw at them. They're the ones today who are holding those missile launchers and launching all of these rockets and missiles hitting Tel Aviv today. Hamas started, just like I said, and still is a resistance movement. Resistance movement, that means it is not just like, some people like fighting and with guns and so forth. It's basically an ideology. It's basically a choice. And it's basically a belief and determination of free people to fight against oppression, occupation, and colonialism and Zionism. Then it was like in 2006, it emerged actually as the representative of the Palestinian people through democratic elections that the US themselves actually pushed for. And ever since, we have not had any other election ever since 2006, which means that until today, Hamas is the only legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. So if you're talking about basically trying to defeat Hamas, you're talking about trying to defeat Palestinians at all. And that story would never change. Actually, now more than ever, because you see what Hamas is doing right now is basically like every day, the popularity of Hamas, the constitutionality or the constituency of Hamas, the support of Hamas among Palestinians, among the world community is just growing and multiplying by the day. As a Palestinian, how do I see it? For me, Hamas is true, like it is representative of the Palestinian resilience and resistance. It is the legal constitutional representative of the Palestinian people. But I also have like even higher standards to hold Hamas to, which is basically the guidelines, the Islamic guidelines and principles and code of conduct. That's what I really worry about the most. Like when I see Hamas doing anything, first and foremost, I ask myself the question, is this compliant with the Islamic code of conduct and how to treat whatever issue at hand? And alhamdulillah, seeing from the release of the Israeli prisoners taken on October 7th, seeing how they manage all of those files that they have to deal with, seeing the speech that they put out, seeing their outlook and how they're not carried into reactions and deviating from that code of conduct that we all expect them to adhere to, seeing actually what the captives after the release, how first of all, during their release and after the release was saying about Hamas and how they treated them and the standards that they were held at, all the way from like the foot soldier all the way to the top leader of Hamas, Yahya Sinwar himself, going to meet with those prisoners and giving them assurance that nobody will harm them. And in spite of the siege, in spite of the lack of water, medicine, and everything, that they're giving the best that they have to those captives and so forth. I feel today certain more than ever before that those people, there is no way that they can be anything but victorious. So that's why, like, when I look at the politics, when I look at what's happening in so-called the Israeli situation and political landscape and everything else, when I see the US and the Congress and everybody is fighting for how much support we can throw at Israel, and the same thing that's happening in Western capitals, to me, that's the noise. To me, these are people like they're really playing on the margins, on the sidelines. The narrative today is controlled by Hamas. The reality is created by Hamas, and the future is being made today in front of our own eyes by Hamas. And I think that's good news for everybody around the world who has any belief in freedom and human rights.
Yes, I'd just like Professor Jeff Halper and just your thoughts on Hamas as well, against what Professor Nidal obviously has been saying. And we've seen more of it come to the fore with the recent release of the prisoners, where we've seen two different narratives. On the one hand, we see people like Ben Gvir, banning celebrations as prisoners are released. Keeping a close eye on them, and obviously a lot of threats that have gone along with that as well. On the other hand, we've even heard that the Israeli prisoners that have been released have been told to say very little. Now, how does one actually read into these two very, very different narratives coming out from just purely the release of prisoners on both sides?
I don't know. I mean, I think we have to separate the events themselves from the bigger political context. I mean, nothing good, can be said on a human level in terms of the attack of October 7th and the killings, and I'm not sure. I think that prisoners are being treated decently, but I mean, there are reports of things we don't know yet. It's very early. At the same time, of course, not only is Israel responsible for crimes at a much greater level than that, 15,000 people killed and more than 5,000 children in Gaza. I mean, I'm not justifying or either of those things, but what I'm trying to say is that we have to. That's why we have. I'm very hesitant to minimize the human suffering on any side, but at the same time, we have to understand that this is resistance, that Zionism is violent, and you could really make the case that the violence is the appropriate and only response that the Palestinians have left them. I mean, the Palestinians have tried, not only Hamas, but the PLO and others have tried negotiations. They've tried, the first Intifada was nonviolent resistance. They've tried to appeal to international law. They've tried to appeal to the national community. Nothing has happened. And I think with Hamas, there's a real story here. And I think it's something we have to begin to emphasize. We talk about Hamas. Hamas has been demonized. Talk about Hamas. Hamas is a terrorist, the United States designated this as a terrorist organization, and all of that. But nobody is differentiating between the political wing of Hamas and the military wing, and I think that's very important because obviously, in the end, I mean, armed struggle, plays a role. I don't think armed struggle is going to win because I think Israel's too strong. But the vast majority of Palestinians today do support armed struggle. I mean, armed struggle certainly is legitimate, and it's moral. The question is, strategically, is it going to work? But I think at the same time, the Palestinians have to engage, and the world has to engage with the Palestinians, I think, as Professor Nidal has said. And engagement is not the military wing. The military wing of Hamas is resistance. The engagement wing is the political wing. And the problem is that the political wing has been isolated by the international community. You know, don't forget in 2005, first of all, the Muslim Brotherhood itself, that Hamas is a part of, is not ISIS, and it's not. We know. In other words, this whole idea of the United States and Israel trying to say all the time Hamas, ISIS, Hamas, Daesh, making that that it's simply reducing Hamas to a terrorist organization. We know that's not the case. That the Muslim Brotherhood is much more. It has much more substance, political substance than that. But at the same time, then, we have to say that the political leadership of Hamas has always been trying to engage. From elections, the prisoners' document of 2006 that we tend to forget about, and the Hamas revised charter of 2017, in which the Hamas political wing has even said, we accept the two-state solution. Will never recognize Israel as a legitimate state. That's a moral and I think justifiable position, but we will recognize the political reality on condition that the Palestinians get all of the territory occupied in 1967. So the political wing of Hamas has been very positive. It's been very engaged. It's tried to engage, but it's been isolated by the international community, especially the United States and Europe. And so I think what's happened is over the years, as the political wing has not been able to deliver anything, the military wing, I think, has begun to be dominant. And again, even though you could justify obviously the resistance, it can't only be this. If Hamas becomes simply the military wing, and the political part of it is isolated, even by Palestinians in a way, and becomes irrelevant, and everybody's looking to the military wing, I don't think that's very positive for the Palestinians. So I think part of our job is to make the discussion of Hamas much more nuanced. We have to emphasize that it is not simply Sinwar and the military wing, but Hamas is much wider than that. It has a very strong political wing. It's a party. It's a political party, a movement that cannot be denied. It has tremendous support among the Palestinians. It has to be a part of the process. And so I think one of the things we have to try to do, and I think Professor Nidal is helping with that, is to push back against the idea that Hamas is illegitimate, that it can't be an actor, that it has to be destroyed, that it's only a terrorist organization, that it has nothing to offer, and so on. That is simply not the case. But of course, that's the case that Israel and the United States are trying to make, because Hamas is the last real resistance movement of the Palestinians. So if you can get rid of Hamas, not just through the military, but also the political, and you've eliminated that source of resistance, then you're able to pacify the Palestinians to a point where everything is quiet, apartheid can go along, normalization can go along. And that's really what Saudi Arabia and the other Arab states have said to Israel. We don't care what the solution is. We really don't, governments, not the people. We don't really care about the Palestinians, but we need industrial quiet. So if Israel can quiet down Hamas or eliminate Hamas, Abu Mazen and the Palestinian Authority are certainly no problem. They've pacified the Palestinians to a point where they can begin to get on with business as usual. And that's really the danger. So we can't allow anyone to eliminate Hamas as a political actor in this political drama. in my view.
Well, very, very interesting. In fact, I'd just like Professor Nidal to actually comment on what Prof Jeff Halper said with regard to isolation of Hamas, but also in terms of the Muslim Brotherhood, the political wing versus the military wing of Hamas, and that isolation that Prof Jeff speaks about in the international community, but also in terms of looking at the Arabs, looking at the Arab world and Hamas's political wing and their political standing in the eyes of the Arab world, Professor Nidal.
Well, just like a brother, Professor Jeff said, and his brother too.
I can't be a brother.
Yes. When we look at quote unquote the Zionist project, the Zionist project has many hats. One of them is the hats of the Zionists who claimed that hijacked Judaism. But also, like the Arabs, they have their own hats or ghutra or whatever head scarf or cover that they have, and that's still a Zionist form of governance. So they were all created by the same powers. They all derived their quote unquote legitimacy from the same source, which is the ex-colonizer and so forth, and they're all service in this of the same project of subjugation called Zionism on one hand. But to me, a Sisi or bin Salman or bin Zayed or whoever it is, they're all Zionist or they're all different variation of the Zionist project. And honestly, being living in that part of the world and being engaged with those people and having known like many of them on the personal level, and I'm not going to mention what names, but it goes from Yasser Arafat all the way down to some Arab leaders. They're all basically the same agenda. They're all focus on their short-term personal interests, and they're very much, if they're Arabs, they're sellouts, but they're also like in service of the Zionist project. So from that perspective, yes, just like Professor Jeff mentioned, that the political wing of Hamas is extremely important. So is the media and the press core that they have, because you're not dealing with like an isolation of the world. You need to make sure that first of all, your message is coming out to everybody clear and loud, and you want to turn it into quote unquote political project, which is like in the word that we see today as quote unquote national entity and reality. When we look at the situation at large, we see that the normalization project that's been done by those Arab regimes has been going on like very much since the creation of the state of all of these Arab regimes, but also like has taken like different phases. And we see the last phase that they saw that the last political obstacle for normalization and for the Zionist expansion was the Muslim Brotherhood project. And we saw the campaign against Muslim Brotherhood and trying to label it as terrorist organization and uproot it and so forth, especially like after the Arab Spring and the campaign that has been really waged against the Muslim Brotherhood since 2013. And, all of these different variations, they're trying to do the same thing to Hamas. I go back to the point that Hamas is an ideology, and that ideology represents like freedom, represents resistance, represents human dignity. And now if you look at the Palestinians, or anybody who looks at the Palestinian quote-unquote question, the only options that they have at this point is to have Palestinians the example of Gaza, and then you have Palestinians the example of the West Bank. If you ask any Palestinian today, would you rather be in Gaza or be in the West Bank, like the circumstance so forth, definitely all Palestinians would wish to be in Gaza, not being subjugated to what is happening to them in the West Bank from the daily killings and demolition of homes and everything else. What we see right now in the West Bank is actually what we saw in Gaza right before the resistance was able to regroup and to push the Israelis out of the Gaza Strip. So, as bad as it seems today, I think the Israeli incursions and violations of the Palestinians in the West Bank is by itself is creating or spreading that resilience and that resistance to West Bank. I think in no more than a year, we will see a resistance in the West Bank that's even much more advanced and painful and impactful to the Israelis than what we see in Gaza. You have the diplomacy and the politics as very important tools to quote unquote legitimize reality. But that reality is not really created by politics. Just like Professor Jeff said that, Palestinians have been talking politics and diplomacy ever since the creation of quote unquote the state of Israel. And it hasn't gotten them anywhere except for being pushed out of their lands and being ethnically cleansed out of their homes. So nobody in the whole world right now, when it comes to the question of Palestine or Israel, nobody has any doubt that politics, dialogue, all of this stuff is not going to get us anywhere in terms of resolution. Nonetheless, just like Professor Jeff said, that you really need to make sure that the world is aware of all of these details and the orientations and the objectives and the strategic project for each. I think Israel, everybody knows what Israel stands for. I think people are right now starting to see what Palestinians are and what they are looking for. October 7th is very, very pivotal moment in history. I was actually, unlike most people, like, how they viewed October 7th from the first minute that I started getting the news on October 7th, and all of this narrative that came by the Israelis about beheading babies, burning people alive, and so forth. That's really what struck me at first. Like, I need to see, first of all, the truth of this and to see what context justifies it, only to find out actually that October 7th was purely military operation that has taken place against like 3 main targets plus other secondary targets. And from every piece of information that I have, which by the way goes beyond what the intelligence has, that actually was in very total, like in total compliance with Islamic code of conduct, with the goals and the targets, the military targets that were assigned. And so far, like everything that was mentioned about the atrocities committed, quote unquote, by Hamas on October 7th, it turned also so far like has to be a complete fabrication. We see that actually the Israeli side, the Israeli media, every single day they're coming out about the truth about this, about, for example, like the 200 dead bodies turned out to be Hamas actually fighters who burned alive. It wasn't any of them Israeli. The rapes that occurred have been by settlers who came to the area. Even the looting of the homes has been by the settlers, just like we see the Israeli soldiers in Gaza looting the homes that they bomb and stealing the jewelry of that who were soon to be wed Palestinians. We hear, like, for example, like about very much the mass killing of people turned out to be by Israelis. And we saw actually the interviews of those 2 teenage soldiers, 16 and 17, who were said that they were given orders to kill and shoot indiscriminately, causing the high number of casualties on the quote-unquote civilian side on the Israel. So everything that we see so far and what's going to be happening like from now on, in spite of the blockade, the media blockade on the released Israelis by Hamas, who are telling the true side of what Hamas is, how it treated them, what they get to know about Hamas, about the testimonies or the facts and the investigations. Israeli police, for example, like coming to verify actually that all the killing of that music festival happened by police, Israeli police gunships, and so forth. So, like, you talk about like the truth, the reality, everything is going to be coming out. Time is on our side, on the side of the Palestinians, for people to really see the picture clearly, whether it's with regard to what happened on October 7th or what the context of the whole resistance and the conflict in the bigger scheme of things. Time is on our side. I think, like, now we're having like the 6th day of that truce, but that whether it continues towards like to complete the 10 days or we go back to the Israeli genocide of Gaza, time is on our side. Yes, the journey it has ways to go. The human suffering and the toll and the crimes of the Israelis, unfortunately, like they seem to be continuing the same trajectory. But nonetheless, we're living at a moment of truth, and it's revealing itself. And the more the truth comes out, I think people are going to be very clear on what side they stand on. And I think, like, I think eventually people are going to be very comfortable with how clear things to them are and what side they're on.
Yes, Professor Jeff, I see time obviously is of the essence. Just, from your side, what I'd like to know is how long will Israel or the Israeli government be able to maintain this position where they're saying that they have the right to defend themselves, but also they have the right to occupy at any cost, accompanied by genocide, accompanied by brutality. Will they be able to maintain this position? Because even after this truce, we've seen threats of this continuing. We've seen even threats come in from people like Ben Gavir saying that if you stop this war, this government will break up. So these threats are coming through. Just how long do you think Israel will be able to maintain a position like this?
Well, maybe we should end up with a high level of political philosophy. I don't know. The problem is that we're the people. That we're talking in terms of, if you listen to the three of us, talking about human rights, we're talking about justice, we're talking about people's lives, we're talking about peace, we're talking about addressing the crimes of the history and so on. This isn't the language of the people in power, of our governments, unfortunately. And the world is run. The world is run on a transactional basis. In other words, Trump was the epitome of it. Everything was a deal. But that's the way the governments run. I don't think governments care about what we care about. Governments don't care about human rights. Jimmy Carter was laughed out of office in the 70s because he wanted human rights to be a guide to American foreign policy. And they laughed him out, and Reagan came in. There's no values in governments. There's no commitments. There's no long-term vision. There's no strategies. It's all day-to-day deals. So, 2 years ago, Biden says we have to make Saudi Arabia a pariah state because of its violations of human rights. Now he's saying we have to give Saudi Arabia nuclear arms. What changed? Oil. So it's all, and in that kind of a transactional deal game, Israel is actually in a very strong position. And this is something we have to deal with, because that kind of a transactional world only, you're at the table. Who's at the table? Only people that have something to offer. If you're a country with arms like Israel, or geopolitical strategic position like Israel, or powerful political supporters and patrons like Israel, or you're a rich country with oil like Saudi Arabia, you're at the table. You can give and take in this casino-like deal, international politics. If you're an oppressed people, including or especially the Palestinians, what do you have to bring to the table? You have nothing to offer. You have nothing of value. You don't have power. You don't have geopolitical control of anything. You don't have money. You don't have resources. And I think in that kind of a dehumanized world where, the Palestinians, but not the whole global South in many ways, can be completely dehumanized and isolated and sacrificed at the casino table to the dealing and the wheelings and dealings of all the big powers. In that kind of a world, it's very difficult for us to know exactly how do we the people insert ourselves? We don't have power. And we can talk. I mean, I used to talk all the time to ambassadors. Tonight, before I got on, I was on a Skype talk with the U.S. Senator from New Mexico. I can talk to these people. We can talk to them, our prime ministers and our parliamentary members, and it doesn't help because they don't determine their policies by us. And Israel's ability to in the Palestinian laboratory to develop weapons and surveillance systems and technologies of repression that are useful to the Sisis and useful to the capitalists that run the world. that trumps anything the Palestinians can bring to the table. So the real question, in a way, Inayet, that you're asking is, how do we, the people, bring our concerns of justice, humanity, equal rights, human rights, international law to the decision makers of the world? And that really is a question that, Palestine could be a case study for that. But certainly, now in South Africa, in
Thank you
many
for
ways,
that.
you succeeded in doing that, and I think that's a real example for us. Sorry,
Yes, interesting you're speaking about Palestine being a case study, and Professor Nidal, just looking at Gaza and the ability to actually change the world. And, Prof Jeff Halper speaks about the global south, but also in terms of the global north, when one sees a reaction to what has happened in Gaza, and Gaza changing the world in the manner that how the world is actually seen. We've seen so much unfolding, and we see a lot being spoken about in terms of fascism, in terms of imperialism, in terms of racism, all of that. And it's not only, it's not about Israel, but in fact, when one looks at the global north, a lot of it is actually coming out. And do you think that, coming out of this, Gaza would have the potential of actually changing the world in terms of how we look at things, how we look at human rights, how we look at value systems in the world?
I think actually inspires, Gaza is inspiring the entire world right now. And the grassroots, the beauty of Gaza in particular is just like Professor Jeff said, that we have complete separation between decision making and people in power and the streets. And each of them definitely, they have different motives, different goals, different objectives. What we're seeing right now, actually, that the whole popular movement that has been inspired by what's happening in Gaza is actually reaching out to hurt or to impact those politicians and decision makers where it hurts the most. And that's really what's new about this episode. For example, Biden is now trying to pull out from his earlier positions in terms of ceasefire and everything else, because he knows he's going to lose election if he doesn't do that. So basically, now it's actually being very, very impactful to people in power to listen. And now for the very first time, they're feeling that Gaza is actually very much has a bigger say on who's going to win election in Washington, D.C., let alone all the other countries. That's what I meant when I said that when the guns speak, we all have no choice but to listen. And I think for this time in particular, I think Gaza is saving the world. Gaza is changing the world in a way that we never imagined that it could happen. Like about 2 months ago, it was beyond even imagination. We're going to have new realities right now that are inspired by the realities that are created in Palestine by those resistance out of Gaza and spreading right now to the West Bank. And people, once they see that the representation or the representation of the will of the people is really transpiring into political realities and decision making and effective decision makers, I think that's going to be inspiration to all of us to continue down that road. And a time will come that people like Professor Jeff, myself, and yourself feel like we're part of a movement that's really changing the world.
Well, certainly. In fact, I think that final thought of yours in terms of Gaza and how it could actually change the dynamics, the political dynamics in other countries, influencing even the outcomes of elections. That's a thought I'm going to hold, Professor Nidal, and I'm sure at some point in time, yourself, myself, and Professor Jeff Halper will be revisiting this discussion as we move along and as we see elections even taking place in those countries, and just to see what an impact Gaza has had on those countries and also the rest of the world. But for now, unfortunately, time has run out. But to both of you, thanking you for your time with us here on Salam Media, wishing you both well, and we appreciate your time. Assalamu alaikum to both of you, Prof Nidal and Prof Jeff Halper.
Thank you for having me on.
Thank you for having me. Thank you meeting you. Nice meeting you again, Professor Jeff.
Good to see you.
Right, good to see you too.
Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of Wednesday Night. So with myself, Inayet Wadee, and I must say, very, very interesting discussion in terms of analysis, in terms of unpacking the dynamics that have been playing out. And really, both the guests, Professor Nidal and Professor Jeff Halper, really brought a lot to the discussion this evening, and I'm sure going forward we will be having a lot more of these discussions. But for now, it's time for me to sign off and to leave you from myself and the team here at Salam Media. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.